Hey, welcome back to my part 2 of The Last of Us. The last time I talked about The Last of Us, I gave it all its high praises and love that it deserves. Now we're on to part 2 of The Last of Us, and can we give it the same energy as we gave the part 1 of The Last of Us? Well, I'm not really sure about that. As a big fan of narrative-driven games like the Uncharted series, The Last of Us Part 1, I was quite excited to see what drunk men had in store for this game. Most of us probably played this game by now, but still I should warn that there's gonna be heavy story spoilers in this video. I have a lot of complaints with this game, but at the same time I can easily argue with anyone that this game isn't really that bad. Firstly, I think one of the worst things that the game does is the narrative structure. Playing half the game for 10 hours straight as one character and then the rest 10 hours as the other is a very bad choice to make the game. The game should have had Ellie and Abby parts simultaneously, like one subchapter of day 1 as Ellie, then the next subchapter of day 1 as Abby. I can't say if this would have been very successful, but to me the problem with the current design is that you reach the climax midway through the game and then you go about doing menial things for 10 hours until you get back to the climax again. This is even worse when you realize that literally no one gives a fuck as to how Abby reached the theater, which was essentially the point of her character arc, if I should say. Having their arcs simultaneously would have made the story feel converged, but the current structure makes them feel so diverged. Another thing that simply did not work in my opinion is the fact that the game does not have dual protagonists, it has dual antagonists. Both are equally bad when it comes to morality. Compare this to say Christopher Nolan's Prestige. That film also had two very equal characters constantly at odds with each other. However, towards the end, it makes a very clear point as to whom is the better one. In other words, Prestige clearly tells the audience whom to root for. The Last of Us Part 2 simply doesn't do this. Neil Druckmann himself seems so unsure as to who is the star of the show. While I'm on the topic of characters, let me just say that the side characters in this game are downright mid. They're not pathetic, but they're just mid.
It's fine, it's just for the record, you know?
Compared to the original, Dina, Jesse, Mel, Yara, Isaac are just not on the same league as Sam, Henry, David, Tess, and Bill. The latter ones each had personal stories, they had motivation, they weren't dependent on Joel and Ellie. They felt like they simply existed in the same timeline as Joel, but could do without him as well. The characters in The Last of Us Part 2 feel like their lives completely revolves around the lead. You might not notice, but I didn't mention Owen or Lev here. That's because they're the only ones I felt were realistically written properly, or maybe at least written competently to say the least. They both could do stuffs without Abby, or maybe just Lev since Owen could not keep his dick inside his pants for Abby.
You low down, dirty, rotten scoundrel.
And the young white ladies of Jackson, oh Lord, was they having babies.
It might seem like I hate this game, but trust me, I don't hate this game. Apart from the really extremely fun and engaging survival horror gameplay, I do appreciate the story. I do appreciate the boldness this game took instead of making a really safe sequel. There are scenes with Abby and Lev that I actually enjoyed as they strongly remind me of Joel and Ellie. Obviously not as good as Joel and Ellie, but you get my point. Even I love a good other side kind of the story, and that's what kind of attracted me to play The Last of Us Part 2. But the thing with this game was that no one was really interested or invested in Abby, even during her own character arc. Have you all played Detroit Become Human? It's probably the best game of this genre with storytelling from multiple protagonists. Despite both these games being quite different, Detroit succeeds because all three characters have genuine motivations. Their stories overlap way more interestingly. In The Last of Us Part 2, it honestly felt like two different kinds of games. Ellie's story as a separate one and Abby's as a separate one as well that were just forcefully joined together at points. And as I said a while ago, both the protagonists are just morally the worst kind of people. One flirts with and fucks an unborn child's dad and brutally murders a guy in front of his foster daughter, while the other kills off a pregnant woman and threatens an injured starved woman to fight by placing a knife at the throat of an unconscious kid. Also, the ending still doesn't make sense to me still. I feel like what the game is trying to teach us is that violence is not the answer.
Violence is not the answer to our problems, alright?
But that's pretty hypocritical to say the least after you've just butchered down hundreds upon hundreds of people just to get to one person. There's so much in this game that I wish I could talk about, from the storytelling to the gameplay aspects. The emotions that this game drew out from not being a role-playing game worked so well for the storytelling aspects. I felt disgusted when Ellie killed Nora in the hospital. I felt disgusted when Neil Druckmann flipped the perspective from the theater to Abby, but as a player, I'm not supposed to have the authority over those aspects of of the story. And I think that's what made me appreciate the game as a whole. Even in the first Last of Us, you don't get to make the choices that Joel does. You're just in it for the ride. Some of the things I want to say have already been said, so I'll try to praise something new. There was so much symbolism and themes that really contributed to the story. When we flash back to Abby and her father, the animal that they free, a zebra who've just given birth. Neil Druckmann is basically saying here, look, things aren't going to be so black and white from this point on. A baby zebra comes out brown and innocent of the world. Even the brief dialogue between Owen and Abby about the seals, whether they had spots or not, was another nod towards false perspective. The amputation of Yara and Ellie was a good play at the theme of loss. When Mel says you have to cut off Yara's arm, Lev says something on a tune of you can't, she's a soldier. Lev cutting his hair isn't as severe, but the cost of that action was at the cost of and for his identity. Ellie losing her fingers means that she can't play Future Days anymore, something she'll never get with Joel. The duality is rife and so blatant, but gives so much on how the story plays against itself. I love the infected boss fights. The bloater fight in the flashback has Joel saving you, and then gets reprised when you have to finish it alone as Ellie. Abby and Lev are also a pretty good duo. Yara telling Abby that Lev barely opens up to anybody, but Lev as a trans character opening up to Abby, who is this masculine, feminine character, would have not worked as well otherwise. It's a lot to unpack, but I understand why many people came out hating the game, and I can't blame them. And I've been seeing a lot of discourses about the epilogue and people saying that it was honestly very bad story-wise. It made no sense whatsoever. In a realistic world where normal people live, humans with intelligence, no one would have done what Ellie did, leave a peaceful life to go 100 miles on a vague lead to gun someone down. And the last time you did that, you were on the verge of losing absolutely everything. Also, Tommy urging Ellie to go after Abby is the last thing he would do. In the beginning, he was the one to forbid Ellie from going into Seattle. And now, just when Ellie is living a peaceful life with Dina and her kid in a cozy farm, he drops in all of a sudden, forcing Ellie to hunt Abby. And for what? A stupid promise she made? But my counter argument with that is that when a person is clearly suffering from a bad bout of PTSDs and they likely feel like they're going to kill themselves or bring harm to their loved ones, yeah, there probably would be in a world like that. Like seriously, the entire point of the farm was showing that it was not peaceful for her. And I really don't think you just get how bad it was for Ellie. I'm not gonna deny that her leaving was selfish, but I'm also not gonna ignore how she actually was at that point. And yes, Dina and JJ are depending on her, and I want you guys to watch this scene. Just watch it.
Ellie, look at me. It's okay. You're home. You're home. Breathe, breathe. Okay, I'm gonna take him, okay? Come on.
And understand that wasn't the first time she had panic attacks like that. There's a reason why she looks so skinny once you see her on the farm. There's a reason why she talks about not being able to sleep. There's a reason she's shown in the scenes that she reportedly looks back at Joel's death. Her journal makes it so clear that at this point she's clearly suicidal. And if she didn't do something to help herself heal, she was gonna kill herself. Long story short, she saw herself as someone that would end up harming both Dina and JJ if she didn't do something about how she was feeling. That's the point of why she was shown holding JJ when she had that panic attack, because it's clear that he could have been hurt. Like I said, was it selfish? Yeah, that's the point. But did it make sense? Hell yeah, it did, in my opinion, considering how much it got established that Ellie's mental state is at an all-time low right now. She's likely gonna kill herself eventually, and there's a very real possibility that she placed JJ and Dina in danger. And I can tell from a mile people are going to say, Ellie goes after Abby to finally find peace and remove those PTSDs. No, I'm not saying that, because PTSDs is something that can't ever be truly removed. But I do say that she goes after Abby in a really desperate act to at least put herself on the first step to being able to deal with it. And yet she spares Abby for a reason as vague as because she suddenly realizes that killing Abby won't bring Joel back. That's not the reason why she didn't kill Abby. She never acted like killing Abby will bring Joel back. She's not delusional about it. The reason she spares Abby is because she got something that she hadn't had since the first game: control and autonomy. Like seriously, look back at what Ellie goes through even as early as the DLC of the first game. She wanted to be able to die with Riley, didn't get to do that due to being immune. She wanted to have her immunity mean something, and that was taken away from her. When she wanted to finally start forgiving Joel and hanging out with him again, he gets murdered. On top of that, whenever Ellie confronts Abby before Santa Barbara, she both gets her control taken from her and is left at Abby's mercy. Both in Jackson and in Seattle, Ellie having Abby in her grips at the end of the game, it's her actually getting some measure of her control back. And getting that is what allows her to actually see things clearly, even if a little bit, which allows her to finally make the choice to keep her humanity and just spare Abby, as well as the beginning of the process of forgiving herself. So yes, even if I'm not the biggest fan of the ending, I do understand why they went this route. And another thing I want to talk about that many people have an issue with is Tommy's attitude at the end. He would have prevented Ellie from going, especially now that she's finally settled for good. So to whoever is watching this video, I want to ask you something. Do you realize all the stuff that's happened to Tommy by the time of that farm sequences? Let's all walk back through it. The first one, he loses his brother, and it's not even Joel's mistake, it was Tommy's mistake. Number 2 goes on a journey of vengeance, which in the end gets one of his best man, Jesse, killed. The third one gets shot in both eyes as well as the leg, losing the ability to truly be an active member in Jackson. And finally, he basically loses his marriage. So with all of that being put on the table, I do want to ask this. Did you guys not expect Tommy to be vengeful and bitter after losing his brother, failing to actually avenge him and having permanent reminders of that failure by the one who killed them no less, and yet not being able to do anything about it? And the only person that likely understands him at that point in his eyes, or I guess living a really cozy life in the mountains after promising him that she'll make Abby pay. Long story short, Tommy is just a really broken man at this point. And it's not even a coincidence that his and Ellie's situation near the end of the game is basically like a parallel of their interaction near the beginning of the game. Remember, after Joel's death and Tommy is trying to convince Ellie why they shouldn't go after the group before eventually being indirectly guilted by Ellie into going at it alone. Well, the roles are literally reversed now in that regard. And this time, Tommy literally has nothing at this point besides revenge after losing practically everything. Like seriously, I don't see how him acting out in that farm sequences isn't a natural progression from what happens to him in the game, unless you think he's just gonna let all that shit slide. To understand their motivation, I think you really have to put yourself in their kind of world that they're living in. There's no police, no criminal justice system, no law. If you want justice for your loved ones, your only option is to take matters into your own hands, otherwise the killer gets away with it. It's a very human response to want justice. I do agree that Joel did a lot of bad things and it made sense that it caught up to him. Objectively, that's all true, but Ellie is not objective. She just saw her own father figure brutally murdered in front of her eyes. And whether it was right or wrong, he's her family. It's the same for Joel in the first game. Now, objectively speaking, Joel was wrong to kill those people to stop the surgery, but he's his daughter. What do you expect? Even Abby's dad was struggling with this kind of question when Marlene was asking him if it was Abby on that table, what the hell would you do? And he can't even answer her. Asking a parent to sacrifice their child regardless of the justiceness of the cause is an awful big price to ask. Even I couldn't do that if I had a child of my own. I don't fully agree with many of the choices the characters make in the game, especially Ellie, but I do understand where she's coming from. She's grieving, traumatized, in pain, and just wants justice. There's no other way to get justice than to just go after Abby herself. Personally, during my third playthrough of this game, I was able to get on board with Abby. She just grew on me, and at the end, I just didn't want her dead. I just wanted to find peace for both Ellie and Abby, and for them to find some kind of happiness again. So at the end of the day, I think this game still has its problems, but I think I can appreciate it for being so ambitious. Whether that's a good or bad thing, that depends on you as the player. But maybe in the future, people can actually appreciate the game in an ambitious way.